Welcome to In the Arena. I'm your host, Mindy McAlindon, and joining me today in the arena is the Speaker of the Arkansas House, Brian Evans. Brian represents District 43 of the Arkansas House of Representatives. He's a longtime resident of Cabot and a small business owner. He first ran for office to be a voice that was practical and conservative leadership. But lately, he's been at the helm of one of the most impactful legislative sessions that we've had in recent memory. We're talking about education, healthcare, energy, and so much more today. So Speaker Evans, join me in the arena.
Well, thank you. Great to be here with you today. It seems like session was ended, although it was just a couple of days ago. It already feels like that a lot of time has gone by, so it's great to see you.
It does. It is great to see you too. So I always love to start at the beginning. Just real briefly, share with me kind of your story, where you're from, and what led you to run for office in the first place.
Back probably to a moment in time in my early childhood, my grandmother was a public school teacher. She taught for 40 plus in public school, taught a different subjects, but I remember as a young boy sitting in her kitchen table. She was a widow, a single parent, and she had stacks of papers on her table. And I said, "Mama, what do you do?" She mentioned that she was working on her lesson plans, and I asked her to explain. She was talking about how she was preparing for the next day of school, and I said, "Well, why do you do it?" And she said, she looked at me, and she was that textbook old school mom. She had the little round glasses that sat on the end of her nose. She was about 5'3", always used that pointing, and she looked her finger at me, and I do it in the life of a child. And that really became rooted in me because as I started growing up in my teen years, I had the opportunity through a friend of the Arkansas State Capitol stage on different occasions. Was chosen by my school to represent our state. So those early moments in my life of just instilling the characteristics of civil service has just always been there. And my wife and I decided where we were going to land and set down roots, just became very much active in the local community with some nonprofits, organizations, giving back to the community, coaching youth league sports, just wanting to do more to give back who would a pathway for me, but also to be a voice for those who can't always be a voice for themselves. And I think that just continuing to follow that spectrum has led me here today.
Well, you certainly lead with that attitude, I will say. I've only known you now for 3 years maybe, but I think your attitude when you were in the House, and then also now that you've moved into leadership, has certainly been one of service. You are definitely a servant leader, I will say, and I appreciate that. And I think that shines through in just the attitude of people during the session as well. So I think that's reflective of your leadership. So let's talk about that decision that you made to run for Speaker, because that's a big step. This is your fourth term in the House?
Yes,
is that right?
my fourth term.
Okay. So your fourth term, and you decided, goodness, I think I'm just going to run for Speaker. So kind of what inspired you to do that? And then we'll dive down a little bit more about what it's been like to kind of manage such a diverse group of leaders.
I think that begins just in the fact that I remember those days back in 1983, serving and watching the institution, as it functioned, and some of those old members back in those days. So back in those days, the term limit, you had a lot of what I call pioneers that would go to the well and really fiercely debate in an attitude of advocacy for their districts. And I remember thinking incredible that was, of pure advocacy, representation for folks that could not represent themselves. And so thinking about that, I've just kind of became a political nerd through the years with that. I have such respect for the institution, the integrity and the sanctity of the institution. And I like that what the body seeing over the past couple of sessions, listening to members, wanting you a pathway, some of our successful speakers have laid before. I just felt like I could step into that role. I didn't have to recreate the wheel. It was just my responsibility to make that the ship of conservative politics, representation of our party, continued moving forward in the right direction, and I was willing to take on that challenge.
And so what's been the biggest surprise since you've been there? Is it what you thought it would be? Are there a lot of things that you're like, "Ooh, wish I'd known this before I started this journey?"
Well, I've spent 30 plus years in my what I'll call my life in supply chain and logistics management, and so everything that we do every day representing our clients has to do with it's being on time. It's getting things just in time. So I'm pretty OCD about time with and time management. So one thing that has really surprised me is with my professional career, a client calls, they need a solution. We put all hands on deck with our operations team. Serving as the speaker has been challenging in that mindset because when a situation presents itself and a member wants help with an issue, I want to jump in, put all hands on deck, and whatever it takes, fix that problem. But what I've had to learn is, as speaker over the last few months, I've had to operate in what I call 15-minute windows. Everybody wants 15 minutes, or they want 10 minutes,
Hmm.
or 5 minutes. Being able to
Hmm.
go from subject matter to subject matter every 5 to 10 minutes. Delegation, I'm also hands-on with my company, being in operations, and so learning how I have to delegate through our incredible staff in the Arkansas House, but also through our leadership team, folks like yourself who have shown a very mature leadership, always with responsibilities, with it. I've had to learn how to really delegate those things out and trust that it's going to be done and going to be done in an effective manner to represent our caucus. And we've got a great team that's been able to do that.
You do have a great team, and you had some people who were seasoned, who'd been there for a while, and then you brought on a brand new chief of staff as well, and she's been absolutely amazing. I mean, just we were talking the other day that she's just really steady, just a very steady hand in the house. So it's interesting to kind of watch this team that you've brought together to get this done. So
I
talk to
appreciate
me.
that. And, I'm sorry, I was just going to add to that. We had some seasoned people on staff, but some roles, like for our parliamentarian, our director of House operations, even though they had been in the House for a number of years, that was new roles for them. So when you look across, our team, uh, we brought in some young folks to that, and I feel very strongly that I have a responsibility playing a role developing next generation leaders. We have a lot of stars in the House. They just needed a chance to rise. And so, on through the interim, plugging people into leadership responsibilities, we really look forward to that and giving new members an opportunity to establish themselves. Developing a bench is what I.
Oh, and I think that's really wise because even though our term limits are longer than when you first started, there's still term limits that are there. And of course, we always have elections, which are also term limits in and of themselves. So it's important.
Yes.
I think it's really wise of you to continue to develop that bench because you really don't know what's going to be there in 2 years. And so in the interim, do you find that you'll have a lot of activities, or do you feel like the really hard push was these last 90 days? And then now you can kind of settle in and start to get things in place for the next session. Did you understand that question?
So, actually met with staff on that yesterday. Actually met with staff on that yesterday. Started working on the calendar for like the next 90 days. We're going to set aside in a couple of weeks to just bring staff together, kind of do a debrief, a detox to look at after we've all decompressed. Seems like we've got a lot of D words going on there. But to really look back over the last 94 days of session to see where we feel like we made changes that provided a lot of positive results. Look where we can make additional efficiencies in house operations, how we can get more people even involved. Their districts elect them. They want to see them thrive when they're there. And so getting more people involved, helping part of the progress of the House and the caucus is going to be really important. But here soon. And so we will probably, we should audit that will start meeting in and the legislative council will meet the third week of May. And so we'll have a couple of weeks off to rest, but May will be in full steam ahead.
Yeah, it seems like there really isn't much of a rest period, but that's all right. That's what we get elected to do. So it's kind of fun. All right, so let's jump right into session because it was a big session. We had
Sure.
what almost 3,000 bills total filed between the House and the Senate, which is a
Mm-hmm.
tremendous number. I don't remember quite that many being filed last year or last session. And I have a list of bills that I kind of want to walk through that I think are maybe the big ones, but I don't know if you have one in particular that you think is kind of the flagship of the session. I'd love to hear what you think it is.
Well, I'm really proud of the work that we did all across the spectrum of legislative topics in representing our districts in the supermajority that we have in Arkansas. I think we did tremendous work in healthcare. We have not ranked healthcare, and I think that when you look across the House, you've probably heard me say, I think that everyone thinks that there is a very sense of equality with the 100 members of the House, but because all the guys, they show up in their suits and their ties, and the ladies show up in their business attire, and everyone has one vote, and so you think, well, we've got 100 members of equality here, but the reality of that is true because taking partisan out of it and taking super minority out of it, the bottom line is Arkansas is a very diverse state, and what it takes in House districts that make up about 30 to 31,000 members per district, what it takes for someone to represent a district maybe in Southwest Arkansas or Southeast Arkansas is totally different than representing a district in Northeast or Northwest Arkansas because the population makeups are so different. And so being able to balance that, I think we've done a very good job of that. The work that we've done in healthcare, the work that we're doing to address some water issues across the state, what we have education again, Governor Sanders pledged that we were going to be the Arkansas. We were going to be the Arkansas state, and I think once again in the 95th General Assembly, we have proven that with the investments that we've made, both in K through 12 and every aspect of that, from public, private to parochial to homeschool, but also what we're doing in higher education, maternal health, addressing our rural and municipal water situation, and education, what we're doing in criminal justice. I think across the board, it was a successful session.
So let's dive into a little bit more in the maternal health bill. Let's talk a little bit about what that addressed, and you can roll into that some of the rural stuff as well if you want, but just give us a little description about what that really means to the average Arkansan.
To the average Arkansan, I would say that when we speak of maternal health, it probably hits home. Just during the 9 months, we had 14 labor and delivery divisions of hospitals. And so if you are, I'll use your area of the state, for instance, let's just say hypothetically that the labor and delivery wing of Washington Regional closed. There's one or two other major hospitals up there that are going to have labor and delivery operations available to all the expectant mothers up there, and a plethora of OBGYNs to help them through their pregnancy and through the delivery and that postpartum. But when you talk about many of our rural hospitals across the state, where they may be the only hospital in a 60, 75, maybe even 90-mile radius, and that labor and delivery wing closes, that brings a problem to the next generation of Arkansans. Maternal health is a generational problem. It's one that has been neglected. And so by utilizing the amount of $1 million that Governor Sanders and her balanced budget allocated in additional funds to put into maternal health, some red tape restrictions where there are to help that expectant mother throughout that pregnancy. making sure that there are some incentives to young physicians to get into these depressed areas of healthcare. I think we are taking this at a full spectrum approach. And it's going to take some time till we see real change and real uptick in the statistics. But I think that it has become a priority for the governor and for this legislature. We've taken the steps to help these families and change this generation of healthcare.
No, and I think that's great. And we even looked at expanding roles for nurses, right? We looked at doulas. We looked at a lot of opportunities specifically. I mean, it's for all across Arkansas, but I think specifically it hits hard in those rural areas because as a mom, if I've got, especially if I'm a single mom and I've got a kid or two at home, I'm not going to drive an hour and a half for my checkup, right? I'm just going to try and deal with what I've got. And to be able to put people into that rural healthcare gap has been critical. So I agree with you. I think it's probably not one of the sexiest bills that we passed, but I think in terms of changing lives long term, and changing areas of our state long term, I think you're absolutely right. I think it's a pretty important flagship bill. So I appreciate you going into depth on that.
Yes, ma'am.
Let's talk a little bit. Let's talk a little bit about well, we're still on healthcare. Let's do this. Let's talk about the PBMs and pharmacies. So that, for a lot of people, they're like, what does this mean? Is my pharmacy closing? Let's talk about what is a pharmacy benefits manager or PBM, and why is it bad for them to own pharmacies? Or why do we passed a law that they can't? So why would we do that?
Well, if you go back in time, I don't recall which General Assembly it was, but you go back in time, there felt to be the necessity to create PBMs or pharmacy benefit managers, and I think the initial plan for that was to do that so that they were kind of a back office administrator. I think our pharmacies were struggling with the massive amount of claims processing, invoicing, getting payment, getting reimbursed. PBMs were created to be an administrator, and kind of morphed into something else. And we started seeing three primary PBMs that grew exponentially, that being Caremark, Optum, and Express Scripts, which I believe is owned by Cigna. And through vertical integration, they began to expand, create their own pharmacy networks. And while I have no issue whatsoever with vertical integration, it becomes a real problem in our state when patients self-directed to specific pharmacies or healthcare plans are limited for our constituents on where they can get their goods and services that they need. We were seeing, I think the commission released several that showed where there were a significant difference in the amount of reimbursements that was going to independent owned local pharmacies as compared to the reimbursements that was going to the pharmacies that were owned by the pharmacy benefit managers. And it just created a whole world of competition.
Mhm.
It was having a great effect on our local family owned hometown pharmacies. And those in the last 2 years that have closed across the state. And so bigger was getting bigger, smaller was getting choked out. We different things over the last general assemblies to create a more level playing field, but to do true PBM reform and make this a more free enterprise, market driven success, we had to take House 50 and put that in place to do that.
Yeah, and that did cause some consternation. I think we heard some people concerned that their pharmacies might close, but on the whole, if it's really up to that PBM pharmacy structure, if they want to be a PBM or if they want to be a pharmacy. And so this is not forcing any pharmacies to close. Everyone can make those market decisions. Is that correct? Great. Does that assess pretty well?
That is, and so just
Okay.
Sunday at church, an elderly gentleman come up to me who had seen those early morning commercials, who had great concern.
Mhm.
What's and he said, Brian, are all of our local pharmacies going to close? And I said, no, sir. And he said, well, that's what I'm seeing. That's what I'm hearing. And I said, well, do you do you get your prescriptions from CVS? And he said, no. And I said, well, do we have a CVS in this district? No. And I said, well, then this is not you. And he said, but I get my prescriptions through mail order. I still be able to do that. And he said, but some of my prescriptions come from a local pharmacy and they do home delivery. I'm still going to do that. And so there's just a lot of bad information out there, even though it was, it was a big bill. It was, the PBMs made it more confusing by the massive amount of money that they spent through marketing, whether it was on television or text messaging campaigns or mailers dropping in the mailbox. The real issue is that it was a simplified issue. He said, if you want to be a PBM, which was the intent of the law to begin with, they can still do that. They're just going to have to decide if they're going to be a benefit manager or an insurance provider, or they're going to be a pharmacy. They just do both, and create an unfair marketplace.
Well, and I appreciate just the opportunity to speak with you on these bills and kind of clean up some of that stuff, because in the midst of session, both sides fight pretty fiercely. And for this specific issue, there's a lot of money on the table for both sides. And so everyone's going to fight, and the issues do get kind of cloudy. And so I appreciate the opportunity to have you kind of speak into it and say, this is what the bill in practicality means. And I think that's reassuring to know that our pharmacies are still going to be there. Nobody is losing that necessarily. So let's flip over to let's just flip to education. So we passed a couple of big education bills. I think the one that got a lot of across the board votes would be the bell to bell, no cell. What does that mean?
I find, I go back several months ago, planning a trip out of state, and I was reading a book by Dr. Jonathan Haidt that really was targeting what was going on with our youth, especially in our school systems, in regards to cell phone and social media use, almost what you would call an epidemic. And in the elevator of the hotel, I had that book in my hand, and a lady approached me and she said, oh, wow. She said, my book club is reading that same book right now. And from Arkansas, and I said, well, where are you from? And she said, well, I'm from North Carolina. And I thought, oh, wow, here's a group of probably several folks that is reading the same right now. The next day, I was walking through the lobby, and a gentleman approached me, same book in his hand, and he was from Wisconsin. Quickly, I learned that the reason why that book was becoming a #1 list bestseller, because the problem that was addressing youth all across America. And I applaud Governor Sanders, her boldness in taking on this issue and getting these devices out of the hands of these students all day long, and especially out of the classroom. I find it interesting that throughout that whole process, not once, and being kind of what members call one of the education guys, serving on a local school board for 10 years, chairing our education committee in my time in the House, a lot of me want to talk about education. And through those years, I've built up a strong network across the state of educators reach out to me with issues. Not one time over the last year and a half that this has been a topic of the table have I had an educator reach out to me and say, don't do this. They have all been in locked hand support because of the damage they see youth, but how obstructive to learning in the classrooms. And so taking that to the level that we have and saying, from opening bell of the morning to bell in the afternoon, we are not going to have cell phone devices in our classrooms obstructing the learning time of students, I believe was paramount. And again, it's one of those things that we may not see immediate data that shows we did the right thing, but that the schools that were part of the pilot program over the last school year that voluntarily took this on, they are losing the efforts of what we did because they are seeing immediate results in the classroom, not only with learning ability, but also with socialization of the students. Students are looking at one another again in conversations. We're seeing it in behavior, the whole bullying topic, the disciplinary issues in the classrooms, in the hallways, in the on the recess yards away.
Mm.
Truancy is absenteeism, and finding students are engaging, and I believe we're gonna see tremendous results from it.
No, you're absolutely right. And the book is stunning. And if you have a kid that's in junior high or high school, like you see it, right? But I think some of those stats were that almost half the kids felt isolated, which is so ironic because they're on their phone all the time, and you would think they would almost feel connected. But in reality, we as people are designed for this personal interaction, not interaction through a machine. And so I think you're right. Seeing that, I have teachers who have told me that kids pay more attention now, that they do see kids talking to each other and interacting in ways that we used to. And so I think we will continue to see tremendous improvement. I think it's a bold move that the governor made. I know there were some parents who were like, "But what if I need my kid during the day?" And as a parent who's been able to get your kid all the time, it can be a little uncomfortable. But I think in the long run, our kids are safe at school, and I think this is a way to make sure that they are learning. I love the program actually, so I appreciate your leadership on that as well. And actually, you've been fighting these educational issues for quite a while, as you said. Even last year, you were instrumental in Learns, and so you really have done some big things in the education field. So let's look at
Thank you.
Arkansas Access because, yeah, absolutely. So Arkansas Access is basically kind of sort of a Learns for higher ed. Can I call it that?
Yeah, I think that's a fair statement, or you could almost learn 2.0 to the to the higher
Yeah.
degree. Um, we have some wonderful institutions of higher education in Arkansas, some that are grounded deep in continuing education. But over time, um, in all aspects of whether it's business or when you're talking about group functionality, people don't always like change. I hear people say
Mhm.
all the time, well, change, that needs to change. Everybody thinks there needs to be change unless they're the one having to change. And
Yeah, it's true.
education did not want it to change and evolve. And while they may offer a lot of new high course offerings based upon technology or science, um, they don't often want to change when it comes to the overall spectrum of curriculum and student services. And so I love the fact that one is we are providing more access to students of Arkansas to opportunities in higher education, streamlining that course offering process. I transferred schools. When I came out of high school, I went to one college. And years into that, I decided I needed a different scene. I transferred to a different school. And what we see over, and we have done a tremendous job in Arkansas of developing junior colleges, giving more opportunity for students to stay at home and start that 2 year program. And they continue to run into roadblocks 2 years in at junior college and then wanting to transfer and finish out at a 4 year university. There were roadblocks and courses transferring. And so going to a unified code is going to be paramount to students being able to continue on, providing additional opportunities for trade school, career and tech opportunities is going to be paramount. We've spent the last 6 years really pushing students towards workforce development by developing bigger career and tech opportunities. If we're going to do that, then we need to ensure that they are on a good pathway to be into trade schools or into the two or institutions that offer those opportunities. And so Access is going to do a lot of that work for us.
Yeah, and it does also give kids an opportunity, like, as I think you alluded to get those credits in high school. So cutting the number of years that they're in college shorter, which definitely saves money, puts them back in the workforce sooner, and they can get on with the career that they're training for faster. So I think that Access has really streamlined a lot of things that you laid out there that just make it so much easier for parents and kids to navigate that system and to really zero in on what they want to do. So I think there's a lot to be said there. And then last session we also ran some an amendment, I believe, that allowed for scholarship money to go to those trade schools as well. So we're continuing to make sure that there are two paths, right, available.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
So Act, we created dual ways for diplomacy.
Hmm.
And as a second stage to that, I believe Representative from up in
Hmm.
one of your neighboring districts up there, Senator Jane English, were really paramount in putting forth a constitution that went to the voters, and the voters of Arkansas overwhelmingly supported it. And that was to allow scholarship funds through the Arkansas Lottery Scholarship Program to be used for scholarship opportunities for students that were going to go to trade schools. And you know, it was a great initiative, and the voters of Arkansas supported it. They know that we have to continue to take bold steps in workforce development, and this is going to give a lot of students a lot of opportunities into those workforce fields and not come out with a lot of debt hanging over their shoulders
Yeah.
while they're doing that.
Which is pretty amazing. There's so many more bills that we could talk about. I mean, again, we went through 3,000 of them. So there are a lot of bills, but I do want to wrap up because I told you we'd stick to about 30 minutes. And so I want to keep my word, especially since you are very time specific, being in logistics. So, but let me just, last question. This is my favorite question to ask, is you kind of reflect on what you've done. Either tell me something that you are most proud of, or tell me one thing that you hope you could still accomplish in the last few years of public service that you have.
Well, so with the first question, I went in and I think I shared with the number one thing for me for this session really had nothing to do with me and pieces of legislation. The number one priority that I went into this session as speaker, I wanted on recess this past Wednesday when everyone was packed up, bags packed, loaded, and they dispersed to the four corners of our great state. I wanted them to drive away, even though with the weight coming off of their shoulders, and as they reflected on their drives home, I wanted them to look back and say, I had a successful session. Now,
Hmm.
I can't define what success means to every member. It
Right.
could be one bill that one member had that was constituent driven, that solved a problem for a family or a business back in their districts, and by them do that this session. It may have been someone who carried a really big piece of legislation that affected everyone statewide. It could be someone who a specific population that they were trying to help, maybe in victims' rights, maybe in or maybe in developmentally disabled, and they worked tirelessly to get that done. If the majority of our members, the Capitol Wednesday, with that, this had been a successful session, and I'm going to be back over the weeks and think I was able to help our members be successful. And that goes across both party lines, all the other 99 members. That was my number one. Looking back on that, as I've had member after member come to me over the last few years, just say, thank you. This was an incredibly smooth session. I feel like that across the board, every member got the opportunity to share and practical present their issues, to take it through the process, and maybe their bills made it through committee, maybe it didn't, maybe it made it through the House and was derailed in the Senate, or maybe it sat on the governor's desk for signature and now is a law in the state. The response back makes me come home and feel like that for the majority we were able to accomplish that.
That's fantastic. That is fantastic. And I will echo, I do think it was a good session. I think I've heard just talking to my colleagues over the last couple of days as you kind of debrief, once we got to recess, that they're happy. It was a good session. It was a solid session. I think there was some craziness that went on in the session just in general. It was a different session than last session. But I do think that people felt like their bills got heard, they had opportunities. I think the pacing was good. We had good pacing. And so I think that people are very pleased. So I do appreciate your leadership. So thank you. And I appreciate you
Great.
coming on today. I know I've been looking forward to this. I think I asked you maybe 2 months ago, and I was like, I am dying to have you at the end of session just to get this recap because you do bring such experience to the table, having been in multiple sessions beforehand, and then now stepping into this big role. I've been excited to hear what you have to say. So I thank you for that. I thank you for your time and your leadership, and just sharing all of these insights. And I really do look forward to what's to come over the next couple of years.
Great. Mindy, you've been great to work with during the session. I appreciate so much your willingness to take on responsibility, some things that we worked together on, some things on some working groups, and just listening to our members and working to accomplish things for our caucus and for the membership as a whole. And it's been I've had this circled on my calendar. I knew the date was going to come. When you asked, and forget, but I'm glad that you didn't. This has been a pleasure to do, and I thank you for including me.
Thank you. Thank you. Have a great day. I will see you soon.
Great.
So I hope you've enjoyed this episode with Speaker Brian Evans. We really talked about what some of the most impactful legislation was in this 2025 session, and we have transformed higher education with the Access Act that we just talked about, and even K-12 by just putting cell phones away. And I really look forward to seeing the impact that that will cause. We talked about better access for maternal health and rural healthcare across the state, which will transform our state. And as we continue to bring businesses in, that's something that businesses are going to want as a state that has great healthcare. And I think we will continue to improve on that over the next couple of sessions, but this is a great starting point. We also talked a little bit just about his agenda and his priorities of making sure that members are heard, that members who have been elected to lead are able to lead, and to bring back legislation that impacts their districts in a great way. We talked a little bit about some of the I guess we didn't get into energy reform, but we did have some great energy reform this session as well. And I think Speaker Evans also gave us a great behind the scenes look at what it means to lead a house of 100 diverse people. And so I just really appreciate the leadership that he has brought to the speaker's position this session, and all of his experience. I think leading up to this, his business experience, his experience on school board has really shown through in his servant leadership here. So anyways, I hope you enjoyed the conversation. I look forward to seeing you next week in the arena.